7 days ago, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation issued a Level 3 alert, their highest possible warning level, because data centers are crashing the American power grid. NERC said that data centers are unexpectedly dropping load or oscillating demand so rapidly that it is threatening the ability of the bulk power system to maintain frequency, regulate transmission voltage, and otherwise maintain stability. A Level 3 alert is not a suggestion. It is a mandatory directive that forces grid operators to take specific emergency actions immediately. NERC has only issued one other Level 3 alert in recent years. And Ben Inskeep, Program Director for the Citizens Action Coalition, told Utility Dive that the grid instability issues caused by data centers could become quite severe, to the point of creating widespread blackouts. That alert was issued 7 days ago. Summer has not even started yet. The air conditioners have not been turned on, the heat waves have not arrived. The demand has not peaked. And the grid watchdog that is legally responsible for keeping your lights on just told the entire American power industry that a new class of electricity consumer is destabilizing the system so severely that mandatory emergency actions are required before the first triple-digit day of summer. 13 of the 23 assessment areas across North America now face elevated or high risk of energy shortfalls, according to NERC's most recent long-term reliability assessment. Summer peak demand is forecast to grow by 224 gigawatts over the next decade, a 69% increase over what was projected just 1 year earlier, and a 24% increase from 2025 peak demand. NERC's own Director of Reliability Assessments said, simply put, "Our infrastructure is not being built fast enough to keep up with the rising demand." And FERC Chairman Laura Sweat said on February 19th, after reviewing the data, that maintaining the status quo guarantees crisis. "Those are not my words. Those are the words of the people whose job it is to keep the grid running. And they are telling you it is going to fail, not in 2030, not in 5 years. This summer, in the months of June, July, and August 2026, when the temperature crosses 100 degrees and every household and every data center and every factory in the region is pulling electricity from a grid that does not have enough generation to serve them all." NERC just raised its demand forecast by 69% in a single year, and nobody told UWHY. In January 2026, NERC published its annual long-term reliability assessment. And the numbers in that report should have been the lead story on every news broadcast in the country. Summer peak demand across the bulk power system is now forecast to grow by 224 gigawatts over the next 10 years. That is a 69% increase from the 132 gigawatts projected in the previous year's assessment. A 69% upward revision in a single year. In the history of NERC's forecasting, which began in 1995, the compound annual growth rates for summer and winter peak demand are now the highest ever recorded. And the driver is not your air conditioner, it is not electric vehicles. It is not population growth, it is data centers. New data centers account for most of the projected increase. ERCOT, the Texas grid operator, forecasts summer peak total internal demand increasing from 650 megawatts in 2026 to 77 megawatts in 2035. A 63% increase driven mainly by 45 gigawatts of large load interconnections, of which 23 gigawatts are data centers. PJM, the grid operator serving 13 states from New Jersey to Illinois, expects its summer peak demand to grow by 56 gigawatts to 210 gigawatts by 2035, with annual net energy growth averaging 4.8% per year, more than double the 2.3% projected last year. Virginia alone has become the epicenter of American data center development, with clusters of facilities that each consume as much electricity as a small city. And the grid was not designed for this. It was designed for gradual, predictable growth in residential and commercial demand. Data centers are neither gradual nor predictable. They demand enormous quantities of electricity 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with zero tolerance for interruption. A single large data center can consume 100 megawatts or more. That is enough electricity to power approximately 80,000 homes. And dozens of these facilities are being connected to the grid simultaneously, in regions where the existing generation capacity was already tight. NERC's Mark Olson, manager of reliability assessments, said that bulk power system capacity fell short of projections this year, and that was the case last year as well. The supply side is not keeping up. Delays in connecting new resources and unanticipated generator retirements are making the gap wider every month. 122,000 megawatts of power plants are scheduled to shut down while demand explodes. Over the next 10 years, 122,000 megawatts of dispatchable generation, the power plants that can be turned on and off at will to meet demand, are scheduled to retire. That is not a small number. To put it in perspective, 122,000 megawatts is roughly equivalent to the entire electricity generating capacity of France. America is planning to shut down the equivalent of an entire developed nation's power supply, while simultaneously adding demand equivalent to several developed nations. The plants being retired are coal and natural gas generators that provide what engineers call baseload power. The constant, predictable, always available electricity that keeps the grid stable. They are being replaced primarily by solar, wind, and battery storage. Solar and batteries now account for 2/3 of all capacity under development, according to NERC. Natural gas additions represent only 15% of projected new capacity, followed by wind and hybrid resources at 8% each. And the problem is not that solar and wind cannot generate electricity. They can. The problem is that they cannot generate it when the grid needs it most. Solar produces nothing at night, wind produces nothing when the air is still. And the summer peak demand hours in most of the country are the late afternoon and evening, exactly when solar production is declining and the grid is transitioning to its evening peak. That is the moment when the air conditioners are running at maximum. The factories are still operating. The data centers are consuming their constant 24-hour load. And the sun is going down. NERC's data shows that the period of highest energy shortfall risk in MISO has already shifted from July to August because of the decline in dispatchable generation and the increasing share that solar and wind have in meeting demand. As solar output diminishes earlier in the day, variable wind and a limited amount of dispatchable generation are left to carry the entire system through the evening peak. Over the past year alone, fossil capacity dropped by 21 gigawatts, while wind and solar capacity increased by 23 gigawatts. On paper, that looks like a net gain of 2 gigawatts. In practice, it is a net loss of reliability because the 21 gigawatts of fossil capacity that was removed could generate electricity on demand, in any weather condition at any time of day or night. The 23 gigawatts of wind and solar that replaced it can only generate when the wind blows and the sun shines. The arithmetic of megawatts is not the arithmetic of reliability. And NERC is telling you in the clearest possible language that the current trajectory leads to blackouts. And utilities know this. That is why they have already reversed or delayed the retirement of 16,000 megawatts of coal capacity since 2022. Power companies that had announced retirement dates for their oldest, least efficient coal plants looked at the reliability data, looked at the demand projections, and quietly pushed the retirement dates back because they could not identify what would replace the generation capacity those plants provide during the hours when the grid needs it most. In Colorado, 2 utilities are suing the Department of Energy because they want to retire their coal plant in favor of a solar plant that needs the same transmission lines. And the DOE's emergency action keeping the coal plant online is blocking the solar project. The fight between reliability and decarbonization is no longer theoretical. It is happening in courtrooms and regulatory proceedings across the country. And the reliability side is losing in the states that have the most aggressive renewable mandates, which are also the states where consumers pay the most for electricity. The transition from dispatchable fossil generation to variable renewable generation is not inherently wrong. It is being done too fast. And too fast is not my opinion, it is NERC's assessment. Their director said it plainly: resource additions are not keeping up with generator retirements and demand growth. The pace of retirements is exceeding the pace of replacement. And no amount of policy ambition changes the physics of the electrical grid. You cannot power a hospital with a solar panel at 9 p.m. 5 regions face high risk of energy shortfalls, and your state is probably one of them. NERC's 2025 Long-Term Reliability Assessment identifies 13 of 23 assessment areas facing elevated or high resource adequacy risks over the next 5 years. By 2030, at least 5 regions face high risk: MISO, which covers the Midwest from Minnesota to Louisiana; PJM, which covers 13 states, and the District of Columbia from New Jersey to Illinois including Virginia; Ohio, Pennsylvania, and parts of North Carolina; ERCOT, which covers most of Texas; and WECC's Basin and Northwest subregions, covering the Pacific Northwest and the Mountain West. High risk is defined by NERC as regions where planned resources would result in energy shortfalls exceeding adequacy targets, meaning the math already shows that the electricity supply will not be sufficient to meet demand under certain conditions that are not extreme or unusual. In PJM, which serves 65 million Americans, the grid operator's anticipated resource margin will fall below the reference level starting in 2029. But elevated risk begins in 2026. PJM's probabilistic analysis shows some summer load loss and unserved energy risk concentrated during wide-area heat events that coincide with low wind and low solar output. In MISO, projected resource additions do not keep pace with escalating demand forecasts and announced generator retirements. The retirement of 575 megawatts of natural gas and coal-fired generation since last summer, combined with a reduction in net firm capacity transfers, means MISO has less dispatchable generation available than it did 12 months ago while demand is higher. In ERCOT, the most extreme summer unserved energy events modeled for 2026 were 1 to 2 hours in duration. But the winter events were far worse, up to 16 hours in duration and up to 29 gigawatts of load loss. ERCOT added mostly intermittent power in the 5 years since Winter Storm Uri. 31 gigawatts of solar, 9 gigawatts of wind, but only 3 gigawatts of natural gas. Texas has less gas, coal, and nuclear capacity than it did 10 years ago, while peak demand has grown by more than 30%. And this January, the Department of Energy used emergency powers under Section 202(c) of the Federal Power Act to issue 8 emergency orders to ERCOT, PJM, ISO New England, NYISO, and Duke Energy, authorizing operators to run generating units at maximum output regardless of air quality limits, and activate backup generation at data centers as a last resort measure. Emergency powers in January before summer. The grid was already on the edge of failure in a winter month. Summer will push it past the edge in regions where the margins are thinnest. Iran war energy prices colliding with summer demand creates a crisis inside a crisis. Everything I have described so far, the demand explosion, the retirements, the data center instability, the narrowing margins, exists independently of the Iran war. But the Iran war has added a layer of energy cost pressure that transforms a reliability problem into an affordability catastrophe. Natural gas prices have surged since the conflict began. The Strait of Hormuz closure disrupted not only oil, but also liquefied natural gas shipments. The United States generates approximately 43% of its electricity from natural gas. When natural gas prices rise, electricity prices rise. When electricity prices rise during a summer heat wave, the cost of running your air conditioner becomes a financial decision rather than a comfort decision. Utility bills for American households were already running approximately $40 per month higher in December 2025 than December 2017, according to the Urban Institute. The Iran war energy shock is now compounding on top of that existing increase. And the most vulnerable Americans, the elderly, the chronically ill, the low-income families who cannot afford to absorb a 30 or 40% increase in their electric bill, are the people who face the most severe health consequences from heat exposure when they reduce or eliminate air conditioning to save money. The Centers for Disease Control documented that Americans over 65 are the most vulnerable population during extreme heat events. Heat-related deaths among seniors have been climbing every year as summers get hotter and electricity gets more expensive. And the grid reliability problem means that even the Americans who can afford to run their air conditioners may not have the option. During a rolling blackout, your ability to pay the electric bill is irrelevant. The power is off, the air conditioner does not work, the refrigerator stops. The medication that requires refrigeration begins to spoil. The medical equipment that requires electricity shuts down. Your phone battery is draining, your internet is down. Your security system is offline. And you are sitting in 105-degree heat with no information about when the power will return because the systems that would tell you are also offline. That is not a worst-case scenario. That is what happened in Texas during Winter Storm Uri in February 2021, when 246 people died and 4.5 million households lost power for days. ERCOT came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of a total grid collapse that engineers estimated would have taken months to restore. 4 minutes. And the grid that came within 4 minutes of total collapse has less dispatchable generation today than it had in 2021. Let me make that concrete for you. In the 5 years since Winter Storm Uri killed 246 Texans and left 4.5 million households without power, the ERCOT grid added 31 gigawatts of solar, 9 gigawatts of wind, and 3 gigawatts of natural gas. Solar and wind produce nothing during a winter storm at night. They produce nothing during the evening peak of a summer heat wave when the sun is setting. And the 3 gigawatts of natural gas that were added cannot compensate for the coal and nuclear capacity that was retired during the same period. Texas has less firm dispatchable generation capacity today than it had a decade ago. While peak winter demand has grown by over 30% and summer demand is projected to grow 63% by 2035. The Texas Public Utility Commission approved 3 765 kilovolt transmission import paths to bring power into the state from neighboring regions. But those neighboring regions, MISO and SPP, are facing their own demand growth and their own reliability challenges. Importing power from a neighbor who is also running short is not a solution. It is a transfer of vulnerability. And when the heat dome sits over the entire South and Midwest simultaneously, as it did in 2023, every region is drawing down its reserves at the same time, and there is nothing left to import. That is the scenario that NERC models in its extreme case analysis. And that is the scenario where the rolling blackouts begin. Data centers are now creating grid emergencies that did not exist 5 years ago. NERC's Level 3 alert issued on April 21st was not issued because data centers use a lot of electricity. It was issued because data centers are destabilizing the grid in ways that the system was never designed to handle. The alert documented that data centers are unexpectedly dropping load or oscillating demand rapidly. In plain language, a data center that is consuming 100 megawatts of electricity can suddenly disconnect from the grid or rapidly fluctuate its demand in ways that create frequency and voltage disturbances across the entire regional system. When a 100 megawatt load disappears from the grid in seconds, the generators that were producing electricity to meet that load are suddenly overproducing. The excess energy has to go somewhere, frequency spikes, voltage rises. Protection systems activate. And the cascade of adjustments required to rebalance the system can trigger failures at other points in the network. NERC's September analysis noted that the increase of large load-related events coincides with an increase in large load penetration across the bulk power system, including data centers, cryptocurrency mining facilities, hydrogen electrolyzers, and manufacturing loads. And NERC found that when it issued a Level 2 warning on large loads in September, entities generally did not have sufficient processes, procedures, or methods to address emerging computational loads. The grid operators did not know how to handle the problem. The data centers were connecting to the grid faster than the operators could develop the protocols to manage them. And Digital Power Optimization CEO Andrew Weber told Utility Dive that NERC's efforts to better align utility and data center operations may take longer than anticipated, which means the Level 3 alert is a stopgap measure being deployed because the long-term solution does not yet exist. The grid is being asked to absorb a class of consumer that behaves unlike any consumer in the history of electrical generation. And the rules, standards, and infrastructure needed to manage that consumer have not been developed. And summer is weeks away, the air conditioners are about to turn on. The data centers are already running. And the grid operators who are legally responsible for keeping your power on just told the entire industry that they do not have sufficient processes to manage the situation. Electricity bills have already climbed 30%, and summer will push them higher than any year in American history. Before the Iran war, before the data center demand explosion, before the summer heat, American electricity bills were already running at record levels. Average residential electricity rates climbed approximately 30% between 2020 and 2025. Consumers in states with aggressive renewable portfolio standards pay an average of 38% more for energy, according to Energy Newsbeat's analysis of the NERC data. And the fundamental economics of the grid transition are pushing costs higher regardless of fuel prices. Building new transmission lines to connect remote wind and solar farms to population centers costs billions of dollars per project, and those costs are passed to ratepayers. Battery storage systems that are needed to back up intermittent renewable generation cost billions more. Grid modernization projects to accommodate two-way power flows from distributed solar cost billions more. And the decommissioning of retired coal and nuclear plants costs billions more. Every one of those costs lands on your electric bill as a rider, a surcharge, a transmission fee, or a rate base increase that your state public utility commission approves in proceedings that most Americans never hear about. In summer 2026, adds the Iran war natural gas premium on top of the structural rate increases that were already in progress. When the temperature hits 100 degrees and every household in the region turns on the air conditioning simultaneously, the grid operators must dispatch the most expensive generators available to meet the peak demand. Those are typically natural gas peaking plants that only run during the hottest hours of the hottest days. And they charge premium rates for the electricity they produce. With natural gas prices elevated by 30 to 50% due to the Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz disruption, the cost of that peak electricity is higher than it has ever been. And the cost of that peak electricity is what determines the highest tier of your summer electric bill. The base rate covers normal consumption. The peak rate covers the days when the grid is strained. And those peak rates in summer 2026 will be set against a natural gas price that includes a war premium, a reliability premium from the tightening margins, and a transmission premium from the infrastructure build-out. Your July and August electric bills will be the highest electric bills you have ever received. That is not a forecast. That is the mechanical result of the cost inputs that are already locked into the system. The fuel has been purchased, the contracts have been signed, the rates have been filed, and the bill is coming. And for the 4.2 million American households that were disconnected from electricity in 2023 for non-payment, the highest electric bills in history will push that number significantly higher. Those 4.2 million disconnections represent families who could not pay the electric bill and had their power shut off. Not during a blackout, not during a grid emergency, during normal operations. They simply could not afford the bill, and the number of disconnections has been climbing every year as rates rise. In summer 2026, the choice that millions of American families will face is not whether to run the air conditioner on high or on low. It is whether to run the air conditioner at all. Whether the medical consequences of heat exposure for an elderly parent or a chronically ill child are worth the financial consequences of a $400 or $500 electric bill that the household budget cannot absorb. That is not a policy debate. That is a life-or-death calculation that millions of Americans will make in July and August of this year. In the richest country in the history of the world, because the electrical grid was allowed to deteriorate, while data centers were allowed to consume as much power as they wanted. Power plants were retired faster than they were replaced, and the natural gas that fuels the remaining generators became 30 to 50% more expensive because of a war that the American people never voted for. Share this video with every American you know who pays an electric bill. Because the connection between the NERC Level 3 alert issued 7 days ago and the bill that will arrive in August has not been made on any mainstream broadcast. Nobody is telling you that data centers are crashing the grid. Nobody is telling you that 13 of 23 grid regions face elevated or high risk of shortfalls. Nobody is telling you that 122.0 megawatts of dispatchable generation are being retired, while demand is growing at the fastest rate since NERC began tracking in 1995. Nobody is telling you that the Department of Energy used emergency powers in January to keep the lights on, and that was before summer. Nobody is telling you that the FERC chairman said maintaining the status quo guarantees crisis. Nobody is telling you that the Iran war natural gas premium is now embedded in the electricity cost structure for the entire summer. And nobody is telling you that your July and August electric bills will be the highest you have ever received in your life. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because I will be covering the NERC Summer Reliability Assessment when it is released in May, which will give the most detailed region-by-region analysis of where blackout risk is highest and what the grid operators are doing about it. Buy a battery-powered fan, buy a battery pack for your phone. Fill your prescriptions early, know where your local cooling center is, and understand that the grid you depend on for everything, your air conditioning, your refrigeration, your medical equipment, your communication, your security, is entering the most dangerous summer in its history with less reliable capacity, more demand, higher fuel costs, and an entirely new category of destabilizing consumer that the system was never built to handle.